Hey guys! I'm a little late getting this video up, but the stuff that's been happening since Megacon was too wild not to talk about, so here is, hopefully, the final video on this subject. Before I dive into everything though, I would just like to ask that people keep it respectful in the comments, please. I get that we all love Charmed and we have our own opinions on who is right and who is wrong, and we're not all gonna agree. I mean, that would be boring anyway. But there's no reason to be condescending or rude, you know? At the end of the day, I'm not on anyone's side. I just think it's interesting to point out different flaws in logic or contradictions and stuff, which is pretty much what all my videos do, just in various forms. So yeah, I don't have any ill will towards Rose, Alyssa, Shannon, or Holly, though I admit she's starting to get on my nerves lately. But yeah, I hope everyone can understand that I mean no harm, and at the end of the day I feel it's more about how much we love Charmed rather than, oh, who did what behind the scenes, you know? So that's why going forward, we're gonna get off this topic and hopefully stay off it for a long time and focus on Charmed itself. But with that being said, let's talk about everything that's been going on. So, as I'm sure most everyone watching this video is aware, Shannon Doherty started a podcast late last year called Let's Be Clear, and in December she invited her former co-star and longtime friend Holly Marie Combs onto the podcast, and together they spoke of their experiences on set and explained their side of the story on why Shannon really left. It's something that people have asked them about a lot over the years, so I definitely think it's understandable that after 20 odd years of being asked the same questions over and over, you just kind of want to put your statement out there and then leave it be. But something I took issue with in the podcast, and a fair few other people did too, was the way that some of this isn't adding up. Like, I won't go into the whole thing because, I already have plenty of videos discussing that. So if you're curious to hear more about my thoughts on the podcast, there are definitely videos for that. I will link them in the description. But in this video, I will say it still baffles me how many people take what Shannon and Holly said in the podcast as the absolute truth. Like, this is 100% the true story. And people also have a habit of saying, oh, Shannon has never had a chance to tell her side of the story before. It's like, yes, she has. Like, what are you talking about? She has had plenty of opportunities. She's been at plenty of cons. She's been asked about it in interviews plenty of times. Like, it's not that she hasn't had the opportunity to speak her piece. She just chose not to. The reasons for that kind of waffle back and forth, but whether you believe Shannon or not, I don't know how anyone can argue that she didn't have the opportunity to say something. But like I said, the main issue I have is how many people take what they said in the podcast as the absolute truth and completely ignore how many of their statements contradict each other. Like, for example, in the podcast, she and Holly claim that Shannon was fired and that she didn't assign the narrative that she quit to herself, yet there's literally a video of Shannon going up on a public stage and not only claiming that she wanted to quit, but made it sound like she was so overcharmed in her character and she just wanted out of there. And then she also said before that she did not come back for the Charmed finale because of the way it was written and that it wasn't true to the character. But then in the podcast, she turned around and said that she never even asked how they would bring her back because it didn't matter. And for the record, people always seem to gloss right over this one. They always focus on the, oh, she claims she quit because of her team, because that's the story that Shannon gave. But this one, where she lied about the finale, people gloss right over because Shannon didn't have a plausible story for that, so they can't defend it, so they just ignore it altogether. I do not get that at all. But yeah, those are two contradictions that there's literally video evidence of. And then in the past, she has sworn up and down that she was barely ever late to the set of 90210. That was maybe a couple of times, and everyone else was way worse for it than her. But now in her podcast with Jason Priestley, she does say she had a habit of being late, but of course she has an excuse for that. But then she also turns around in the same podcast and claims, no, it wasn't me who was late. It's like, oh my god, the back and forth is unreal. Like, there is just too much testimony to Shannon having been late a lot on the set of 90210. Forget Charmed. On 90210, she was clearly problematic, and even now she's like, nope, wasn't me. And here's my thought process. If she can't admit to being problematic on a show where she was known to be problematic, how are we supposed to believe her when she says the same thing about Charmed? But speaking of Jason Priestley, there's something else that's been circling lately that I did not know about. Otherwise, that absolutely would have been in Shannon's video. But it is an excerpt. Excerpt? How do you say that? Excerpt. You know what I mean. Anyway, there is a very interesting passage in Jason's 2015-ish memoir that we're definitely going to cover. So first, let me read the passage. So basically, Jason is describing how he went to work. He ran into someone he'd known from 90210. She's like, oh, hey, Shannon's here. You should go talk to her. So he did. And then this is how he says the discussion went. I headed back towards the trailers and found hers. I banged on the door, and after she opened it, I grabbed her and gave her a big hug. She was very surprised to see me. Come in, sit down, talk to me, she said. What is going on? Shannon, I am so happy for you, I told her sincerely. The show is great, a big hit, and you're doing so well. This is awesome. But seriously, girl, how did you talk Aaron into giving you another show? Tell me. I wasn't even kidding. I really wanted to know. Shannon launched into an explanation. She told me that she'd heard about the script, gotten her hands on a copy, and read it. She knew right away that she could bring something special to the role of Prue, the bravest and most powerful sister, and somehow felt personally drawn to this show. It offered her the perfect opportunity to spin all her previous bad press into something new, and Aaron had agreed. Shannon, that's genius, I told her in all sincerity. I was pleased to see her doing so well. However, within 5 minutes she was already complaining about Alyssa Milano and how she didn't want to work with her, and that she was going to call Aaron and he would have to make a choice. Her or me, as she put it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Shannon, what the hell? Don't do that. Do you understand how lucky you are to have an opportunity like this? A great role on another hit show? Why would you do anything to screw this up for yourself? Come in every morning, know your lines, hit your marks, and keep your mouth shut. Don't make waves, just be cool and make it work. But Jason, you don't understand, and she went off for a good 20 minutes. I listened and then tried again. Eventually, I was sure I'd made my point and that what I was saying had sunk in. It was not to be. By the end of the season, Shannon was off another hit spelling television show. So, there are two major red flags here. First is the obvious one. That despite Shannon and Holly claiming that Alyssa did her dirty by going to the network and demanding that one of them be fired, it would seem that Shannon herself had planned to do the exact same thing. And that definitely shines a different light on the part in Holly's most recent statement where she claimed that Shannon had actually told the network that she didn't want Alyssa fired when they came to ask her. So Alyssa should have done the same for her. It's like, if you hated being around Alyssa so much that you were planning on going to the network and forcing them to choose between the two of you, then it's very hard to believe that they apparently asked you if that's what you wanted and you said no. Not to mention you had apparently planned to get her fired. So how come it's okay for you to do and not Alyssa? The other red flag in that passage that I definitely feel is worth taking note of is, did anyone else pick up on the way that Shannon allegedly described how she got hired on Charmed in the first place to Jason? Remember that Shannon's story on the podcast was that they sent her the script and that she took one look at it, saw spelling, and cast it aside until Holly saw it in Shannon's backseat and encouraged her to try out for it, and thus she trepidatiously agreed to work with Aaron Spelling again, and they started bringing Charm to life. But it would seem that Shannon told Jason a very different story where instead of them sending the script to her, she found out about the pilot on her own, quote, got her hands on a copy of the script because she thought she would be a good fit for the role and convinced Aaron the same. Now, those are two massively different versions of the same story. One in where they came to her because they wanted her for the project, and in the other she pretty much forced her way in because she thought she would be good for the project. And personally, I believe the latter. It would explain a lot, especially how Aaron ended up hiring her again after the way she acted on 90210. Not to mention the fact that we have no real reason to doubt Jason's story. I mean, you can argue that any of the four actresses would lie for their own personal gain, but what reason would he have? He was never on Charmed, so he has nothing to gain from talking about it. If he had wanted to, as some have accused him of, sell books by using Shannon's name, he had more than enough ammunition from working together with her on 90210. He didn't need to talk about Charmed at all. Shannon just had him on her podcast. Don't you think that if his story was BS, she would have called him on it during the episode, considering the podcast is literally titled Let's Be Clear, and it's all about clearing the air and telling the truth? And speaking of the podcast, just as a quick side note, I saw that she had a recent episode where she featured Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I am avoiding it like the plague, because it's bad enough that between the four of them, they're completely dumping all over our memories of Charmed. I will not let them do the same with Buffy. So yeah, please, don't want to know anything about that, just avoiding it altogether. But yeah, I believe him. But anyway, I think that's enough on the podcast. But in regards to Shannon, yeah, I really do not know how anyone can sit there and defend the way she contradicts words that come out of her own mouth, but they do. And Holly is really no better, but we will definitely get to her. So yeah, Shannon and Holly released that podcast, and most people immediately sided with them, taking their story at face value, and have been dogpiling Alyssa ever since. Then on Saturday, after almost 2 months of maintaining her silence, Alyssa finally responded to the podcast at Megacon, but that statement was, as it always seems to be with Alyssa, way too vague. It was pretty much a, oh, I'm so sorry this has affected you all so much bit, and it's like, oh my god, just give people a straight answer. Is it really that hard? Did you or did you not help get Shannon fired? Were you or were you not difficult to work with on the set of Charmed? Yes or no? I swear, none of these 4 girls can give a simple yes or no answer. It drives me up the wall. But, between the backlash from that statement of hers and from the way out of touch GoFundMe she made, that was special. She then gave us a real statement on Instagram, and this one is much better and actually addresses the issue, so this is the one we're going to read. The other one will be linked in the description with everything else if you would like to read that statement as well. So, Alyssa said, I was asked about the Charmed experience on the panel at Megacon yesterday. These slides are the transcript, but I just want to add, I don't know one other show that has had the success that Charmed had where the cast still speaks ill of the experience a quarter of the century later. This is 15 movies and 13 TV shows ago for me. This was 11 years before my 15-year marriage and 13 years before having my first child. This was so long ago that any retelling of these stories from anyone is just revisionist history. I will add, though, with absolute certainty, everything was documented. There was a professional mediator. I was told Holly and Shannon would not participate in any mediation, and an on-set producer/babysitter who were both brought in to investigate all claims. It was then recommended by this mediator, after collecting testimony from cast and crew, what changes should be made if the show was going to continue. The studio, Aaron Spelling, and network made the decision to protect the international hit that was Charmed. I did not have the power to get anyone fired. Once Shannon left, we had 5 more successful seasons, and I am forever grateful. Also, footnote, I have the same attorney now that I had then. He's been my attorney since I was 19. Thanks to Collider for printing what I said verbatim. Thanks to Megacon Orlando for having me and believing that I can get people there for our wait lines. Whew! And thanks to the fans who have had to deal with the chaos and who can't just have the show to love and experience for themselves. And as always, I wish Holly, Shannon, and Rose peace and light in their personal and professional journeys. We all have bigger demons to fight. So, that's pretty much the statement. I don't know what that attorney bit was in there for, and I don't really agree that any retelling of the events is revisionist history. I think it's only if you're telling a modified version of what happened that it becomes revisionist history. But according to Alyssa, there was indeed a mediator and an on-set producer/babysitter who were both there to interview the cast and crew and document any and all incidents to help the network decide what to do to keep the show going. She says the studio, Aaron, and the network were the ones who made the decision to fire Shannon, not her. She didn't even have the power to do so. Now, as far as statements go, it's really not that bad. It addresses the accusations, and it's pretty straightforward while still being tactful and respectful. The one glaring issue in her statement is the same one I mentioned before, the vagueness. First, I do not believe that she had no hand whatsoever in getting Shannon fired. From the way she tells it, she was simply a casual observer, watching all the dominoes fall without touching a single one. Don't get me wrong, I get why Alyssa would be reluctant to admit her role in it, given that it would give validity to Shannon and Holly's story, and if you admit to one aspect, people will automatically assume that everything else is true too. That is just the way they are, unfortunately. Two things can be true at once. But it's actually having the opposite effect. She has already admitted in the past to feeling some guilt about her role in the conflict and that she did feel a sense of competition. So the more she tries to deny being involved in Shannon's firing, the less people believe her. I think the much smarter and probably more truthful approach would have been to say that Shannon's behavior had gotten so bad that she literally just could not work with her anymore. And that brings us to the second point. Let's say for the sake of argument that that's exactly what happened. Shannon was so awful to Alyssa that she just couldn't take it anymore. What exactly does that mean? Other people who have had issues with Shannon can point to very specific examples of how her behavior around or towards them was problematic. Alyssa's biggest example to date has been that sometimes they would ignore each other's morning greetings. Like, what? Girl, if you want to say that there is a mediator involved and everything was documented, then you have got to start giving examples of what and how. Otherwise, it feels like you're just blowing smoke and hoping people will follow it elsewhere. And as it turns out, she is also the one that made sure she called up Brad Kern so she could tell him about Holly's pregnancy instead of letting Holly, the one who was pregnant, do it herself.
And we weren't sure how we were going to explain that, but then I got the call from actually Alyssa that Holly was pregnant, and I thought, terrific.
You don't talk. You're the one that made me go up here. I want Brad Kern up here next.
Yeah, that is definitely shady in my book. It's giving snitch, So, obviously we don't know the whole story there, but it implies that you can't trust Alyssa as far as you can throw her. Not to mention, remember how Alyssa claimed that she would say that she and Shannon are cordial?
How is your relationship now?
I would say we are cordial.
Well, now she's saying that she invited Shannon to coffee after hearing of her diagnosis and was immediately blocked. Cordial, huh? Yeah, right. But on the flip side of that, I do have to wonder if Alyssa was indeed as bad as she's being painted, considering Holly was friends with Alyssa for the entire duration of the show and long after. Rose has gone on record saying that she had no issues with the other women on the show, and even Shannon expressed interest in working with Alyssa again on a Charmed movie, and Alyssa is getting a lot of support from cast and crew on Instagram, including Krista Vernoff. There were bullies on the set, but they definitely weren't Alyssa, which, by the way, Holly responded to saying, "You know none of which you speak. Remember, this show is bad for the world anyway," which is just... Yeah, Holly, your hostility really makes me believe that you're a nice person behind the scenes, for sure. But yeah, that whole "you know none of which you speak" bit really irks me. It's just so condescending, and it's not even true. Just because you don't agree with her doesn't mean that she essentially knows nothing. Krista was on set with the three of them, pretty sure that she would know way more than your average Joe about their behavior towards each other. And a lot of people also got angry at the "this show is bad for the world anyway" bit too, because they thought Holly was the one saying it, but she was actually quoting Krista from a previous statement that she had given regarding the show, which honestly doesn't even have a place here anyway. So someone alludes to you maybe having been a bully, and your response is to bring up a statement they made out of context that had absolutely nothing to do with the subject at hand? That's ridiculous. I swear, these women have never left high school. They are stuck in some sort of time loop where they're repeating it over and over and over. It's deja vu all over again. But for context, this is what Krista actually said. I signed on because Charmed was a girl power show, and about halfway through there was an episode where Alyssa Milano comes out in mermaid pasties, and there was a huge spike in male viewership, and then every episode after, the question would come from the network: "How are we getting the girls naked this week?" she says, insisting there was no attempts at subtlety. And they were throwing money at me, and the numbers kept going up, and there's all this pressure, and all I can think is, I'm creating something that's now bad for the world, and I've had enough bad for the world in my life. Do I agree with Krista saying the show has become bad for the world? Now, obviously I love Charmed, but I think people continuously taking the quote out of context and or using it as a Hail Mary pass to try and discredit someone isn't helping either. Anyway, the point is, Krista defended Alyssa, Holly got mad, and Holly was also responding to other comments saying things like bullshit when Alyssa responded to a fan who asked what happened because they seemed to be on good terms even just a few years ago. Alyssa said she's confused and she didn't know either, that it must have had something to do with her not prioritizing calling Holly while there was a medical emergency with someone Alyssa knew. Honestly, I do agree with Holly there because that does sound like absolute bullshit. But even so, it is clear that whatever happened between Holly and Alyssa has happened recently because even as of late 2022, Holly was still defending Alyssa, telling someone on Instagram that alluded to Alyssa being the problem on set that they were funny and misinformed. And then obviously a year later, there she was on Shannon's podcast and they both threw Alyssa under the bus together, which is also bullshit in my opinion. So you and Alyssa had a falling out and you don't like her anymore. That's fine. People change, people grow apart. But you don't then get to retroactively go back and rewrite history to say that Alyssa was problematic on Charmed when you have spent over 20 years saying that she wasn't. But whatever the case, after Alyssa made her statement, Shannon, Rose, and Holly went on stage together at Megacon the next day and denounced Alyssa's statements as false, saying,
"We simply told the truth because the truth actually does matter. But we wanted to try to save you, the fans, from heartbreak as much as humanly possible. At this point in my life, with my health diagnosis, I'm sorry if I start crying, with fighting horrific disease every day of my life, it is also incredibly important to me that the truth actually be told, as opposed to the narrative that others have put out there for me. We told it together, we told our truths, and we are standing by our truths. There is no revisionist history happening in the truth that I know we told. There is no brush flinging or shoe flinging. There is no lateness to set. There is no mediator for months on end. I recall the facts as if I were still living in them."
Now, I will say that it is very hard not to feel sorry for Shannon here. Even though I don't think we should let her illness cloud our judgment on whether or not she is telling the truth, I can't even imagine what she must be going through right now or the terror she's got to be feeling. That's a lot to deal with for anyone. And even Rose seems kind of emotional, and I kind of can't help but feel bad for her too. But as much as they claim there is no revisionist history going on, and they told their truth and they stand by it, there are just way too many contradictions in their stories for that to be true. And then Holly released a statement afterwards, which we're about to touch on, where she says that she has been relentlessly attacked since Alyssa made her statement, but it's like, no, Holly, you're not being attacked because of Alyssa. You're being attacked because the stories you're telling do not add up. And that's exactly what they're telling. Stories. Because they change them so often, it's hard to keep track of which version we're even on. I mean, the one she gave in her most recent statement on the situation is already different than the one she was giving a month and a half ago on the podcast. So why would anyone believe that she's being honest about events that took place over 20 years ago? And before we read her statement, I would just like to point out a couple more things about the Megacon appearance. So first, I mentioned it was hard not to feel sorry for Shannon and even a little bit for Rose too, but Holly? Not her. Yeah, she did kind of wipe her eyes, but all throughout this statement, just look at her. I mean, I'm not a body language expert or anything, but everything she's doing, the look on her face, the impatience in her hands, the fact that she seems to be looking up and not at the audience, she just seems so bitter and angry and, for lack of a better term, mean. I have never seen that expression on her face before, and that's the word that keeps coming to mind whenever I see it. She looks mean. And Rose wasn't exactly a peach either, considering that little quote she threw in there at the end.
"Winners do not let losers rewrite history."
Winners don't let losers rewrite history? Red flag. Seriously, there are so many better quotes she could have used there. Like, for example, if you stop lying about me, I'll stop telling the truth about you. But winners? Losers? Oh, that just says it all about her mentality. What is this? Some sort of game to you? What did you apparently win? How did Alyssa apparently lose? And I got news for you. It's not about winning or losing, Rose. It never was. It was apparently supposed to be about setting the record straight and respecting the fan base you apparently love so very, very much. The ones you all use against each other like weapons, by the way. It's absolutely disgusting. And you know what? I don't even know where Rose gets off inserting herself in this anyway, because yes, she did work on charm too, and she obviously has her own issues with Alyssa as well. But she was not there when the initial conflict went down between Shannon, Alyssa, and Holly. She was not there. She did not witness anything. All she can do is go by hearsay, and clearly she is going by hearsay, and that she clearly knows everything that happened and the truth of the matter, even though she wasn't even there. I guess what I'm just saying is that I don't feel like Rose has the best of intentions. It doesn't feel like she's trying to shield Shannon and protect Shannon. It feels like she just wants a reason to come after Alyssa. If that makes sense. I think it just comes across as mean-spirited the same way Holly did. And speaking of Holly, let's read the statement she made after this Megacon appearance. And by the way, I kept having to pause this video to read this statement in full because it just flashes by way faster than I think anyone could read. I wonder if that was intentional because she thought people wouldn't actually pause it, but regardless, I did. In the spirit of not being the quiet one or the middle child anymore, I feel the need to defend myself after the many continuing attacks that have ensued since Alyssa stepped out on the stage and essentially called Shannon and I liars when she was simply asked what it was like to work with Rose. Suffice to say, I'm a little shocked and a little disappointed, especially by the things she posted the next day while texting me simultaneously words to the contrary. Sadly, that's not a surprising anymore. She goes on to say, but I was raised to be a fighter. I do not need anyone to defend my honor but me. First off, this is not revisionist history. This is just the history she didn't want people to know about, and the history Shannon wasn't ready to talk about until 1 month ago. We are all thankfully at the age where people are writing books, memoirs, and telling their life story. No one should have to lie about their own life for the comfort of another. Although I have long wanted the girls to get along for the sake of something bigger than all of us combined, it was not in the cards. Clearly. We are all very different and equally headstrong, which was the essence of charm to begin with. I have often yelled at one or the other to lay off the other many a time, as Alyssa and Rose can attest to. And this was after Charmed. Being the middle child sucks. And it was in that interest of family that I tried to shield the audience from our differences to protect something that did indeed and still does have a heartbeat of its own. Case in point, when Shannon and I went to dinner in Florida this week and the host wanted to tell us how the show saved his life. And the show actually helped him get through a very dark time in his life, and it's people like him that make all the blood, sweat, and many tears very much worth it for me, and still too in this day and in this hour. It's stories like his that make me not want to address this story, but alas, it's not my nature to cower in a corner, and I have a big problem with injustice. I heard that Alyssa said she did not have the power to fire anyone, which is ironic because this was actually all about power. But let's go with that and let me explain what she did have the power to do. She had the power to stop the process at any time. She had the power to not talk to the mediator/therapist brought on to protect profits. And as I refuse to speak with him because I go to work to do my job, not talk about my feelings with a strange man. No other cast member was interviewed to my knowledge, or crew, and frankly, the only other regular characters we had at the time in question were Brian and Julian, who were both dating one or the other, so I doubt their testimonials would be all that valid in any case. But there was a case being built which is now clear. A case Alyssa and Alyssa alone had the power to stop. And when the producer said, okay, we will let Shannon go, Alyssa also had the power to say, no, I don't want that, but she did not. She had the power to say no, just as Shannon had said, no, I don't want you to replace Alyssa, when posed with the same option. Because she was a child actor who supported her family just as Alyssa does, and understood the great importance and responsibility of that. Even now, this pains me to write. It was heartbreaking then and still now, and I think a lot of the blame still remains with the producers who knew it was easier to keep us us divided as opposed to united. 3 broken pieces were easier to control and manipulate than one united front, which would have been more costly and cut into their precious profit margin. But in the end, it all worked out as destiny would have it, and we all got Rose, who was a beacon in a dark time for me, and we went on to develop a deep, surprising, and supportive connection that continues to this day, just as Paige and Piper did. And now Rose and Shannon have a growing friendship and support system all their own, which makes my little black heart glow. It's a full circle moment for me, so I will say, don't despair, Charmed family. You are actually our only common denominator. We are still a family of survivors, and we will always be. Truly. Charmed was made for all of you, and lastly, the truth of the matter is that we all are, despite our differences, incredibly grateful for this dysfunctional family in every way. The end. That statement was special. There's a lot to go through here. Starting with how she says in the very beginning that Alyssa stepped out on the stage and essentially called Shannon and I liars. I don't understand why Holly is so surprised by this, considering that Holly and Alyssa were friends for a long time. Long after this all went down, long after Charm even ended, up until about a year and a half ago, really. So it would suggest that either Alyssa did not play as big a part in Shannon's firing as Holly and Shannon are now claiming she did, and Holly knows that, or Holly very well knew and she just didn't care. She's only pretending to care now, long after the fact. So it's pretty much one or the other, But either way, she must have known that Alyssa would defend herself, and if we go with the idea that Alyssa did not play as much of a role in Shannon's firing as they are now claiming she did, considering she's already kind of changing her story in this statement, it's like you must have known that she would tell the truth or at least clarify what happened. So why would you frame it that way in the first place? That's where I'm getting lost. Just this whole what did you think was going to happen thing. I love that phrase, by the way. I saw an album a long time ago that had that title, What Did You Think Was Going to Happen? And ever since then, it's just really stuck with me. By the way, if you ever listen to that album, I would really recommend Worry About You. It's a really good song. But back to the statement. She then says, while all this was going down on Instagram, Alyssa was simultaneously texting her words to the contrary, which is another thing I have a lot of trouble believing. You mean to tell me that after 2 months of virtual radio silence on the subject, Alyssa finally makes a statement on the podcast, and she chooses that moment in time to pretty much text you behind the scenes telling you that she's full of it? I just do not buy that at all. But by all means, prove me wrong. Post the messages where she contradicted herself. I know a lot of people would probably say, oh, she can't do that. There's private information. You shouldn't share private messages anyway. But you can edit out private information. And I feel like if you're going to publicly claim that someone is pretty much admitting that they're wrong or contradicting themselves behind the scenes, you should absolutely back that up. Otherwise, it's just more hearsay. And I'm getting so sick of hearsay. At this point, I pretty much just don't believe any of them. But moving on to more in the statement. In the next slide, she says this is just the history she didn't want people to know about and the history Shannon wasn't ready to talk about until 1 month ago. It's like, so basically neither one of them wanted the history known, but the only one that counts against is Alyssa. Got it. And further down, she says no one should have to lie about their own life for the comfort of another, which I actually agree with, but it definitely doesn't make sense here because, who was Shannon lying for then, other than Shannon? I'm sure she was not lying for Alyssa's benefit, but whatever. She then says, I've often yelled at one or the other to lay off the other many times, as Alyssa and Rose can attest to. And this was after Charmed. First of all, I noticed how you only told Alyssa and Rose to lay off, but not Shannon, huh? Interesting. But I also don't believe her claim that this all happened after Charmed, because really, why would you need to be yelling at someone regularly to lay off the other when the other person wasn't even around to aggravate them? That doesn't make sense. And then she says, and it was in that interest of family that I tried to shield the audience from our differences to protect something that did indeed and still does have a heartbeat of its own. That's BS in my opinion because of the way she acts on the House of Hollowell podcast, but we'll dive more into that after we finish with her statement. She then says, so I will say, don't despair, Charmed family, you are actually our only common denominator. It's like you realize she's talking about everybody here, right? It's like the only common denominator you have is Charmed, huh? Which is why you're such good friends with most of your castmates? Believable, I'm sure. And then lastly, she said that we all are, despite our differences, incredibly grateful for this dysfunctional family in every way. And so didn't you just do a podcast where you essentially implied that you and Shannon were grateful and Alyssa wasn't? Oh my God. So yeah, this statement was a disaster in my opinion. It contradicts a lot of what she's claimed before, and yeah, I'm just not buying what she's selling. I'm not buying any of what they're selling actually. And now we come to what I feel is the biggest issue with this statement. First, let's refresh what Holly and Shannon said in the podcast about the mediator. So, if you remember the podcast, Shannon and Holly's story is that Alyssa went to the mediator and together they built a case against Shannon, and then Alyssa went to the network and demanded that she goes or Shannon does, and threatened to sue them for creating a hostile workplace environment if they chose Shannon. Well, now that Alyssa has clarified her role in the mediator business, Holly is backtracking something fierce without even admitting that she's backtracking, because now she says Alyssa said that she did not have the power to fire anyone, which is ironic because this is actually all about power. But let's go with that and let me explain what she did have the power to do. She had the power to stop the process at any time. She had the power to not talk to the mediator/therapist brought in to protect profits, as I refuse to speak to him because I go to work to do my job, not to talk about my feelings with a strange man. First of all, nice framing by the way. By adding that whole "he was brought in to protect profits" thing, you simultaneously justify your refusal to talk to him, while in the same stroke you make it sound like Alyssa was just as bad as the company. That's nice. Totally not a manipulative way to frame that, but yeah, let's talk about the role of the mediator. You frame it as he's there to protect profits, but you know what? Like it or not, there was clearly an issue between the three of you, and it was affecting your work, and yes, company interest. And if you guys weren't going to solve it, then of course the company is going to step in. What are they supposed to do? Sit there and watch you guys tank the show? Yeah, right. The ironic difference is that Alyssa apparently saw the bigger picture and thought it was better to work with the mediator, and you and Shannon were the ones who thought you could sit there like stubborn children and refuse to talk to him, and you are so bitter that Alyssa did not agree and do the same and actually did speak with him, and so you blame her for everything. But I hate to tell you, if the simple act of working with a mediator led to Shannon getting fired, then there was definitely more to the story. You think the company was going to fire their lead star, the one with a pay-or-play contract, and could have sued them through the nose just because Alyssa complained and didn't like her? Get real. And then she goes on to say, but there was a case being built which is now clear, a case Alyssa and Alyssa alone had the power to stop. And when the producer said, okay, we will let Shannon go, Alyssa also had the power to say, no, I don't want that, but she did not. Do you see what I mean? First they say that Alyssa went to the showrunners and threatened to sue them for creating a hostile workplace environment, and now the story is that they were already investigating the issue, and Alyssa just didn't argue when they came to the conclusion to fire Shannon. That is a very different story than the one they originally told, and I tell you, it's to the point where I do not trust a word that comes out of Holly's mouth anymore, because she can sit there and deny that this is revisionist history, but they're already revising things they said a month ago, let alone what happened 20 odd years ago. I'm sorry, this makes me a lot angrier than it should, because unlike Holly's hypocrisy, I actually do have a big problem with injustice. And to me, this feels like a major one. You have a falling out with Alyssa, and all of you decide collectively that you will make her look as bad as possible while accepting no responsibility for the role in the conflict yourself. It's like none of them seem to realize that you can take responsibility for your role in a conflict without taking responsibility for the entire conflict. Just take responsibility for your part. But no, none of them will do that. Actually, you know what? Alyssa actually kind of did. She's the only one who has even gotten close to it. The closest you have gotten is saying that there were no angels, there were no demons, and I hate to tell you, that's way more vague than anything Alyssa has said. You know, of all of them, Holly is the one who has made me the angriest. And also, it's everything she says. She doesn't hear how she sounds. Like how she seems to think that they can say whatever they like about Alyssa, but if Alyssa should say anything about them, then how dare she? And not only that, but turns out that this sort of behavior isn't even new for her. This we can call you out, but you can't call us out mentality of hers has been well established by this point. And may I just express my utter disbelief that someone left a comment saying, "Can't believe this happens between very mature women of stature. Where has wisdom gone?" And Holly responded, "Out the attic window," when she's sitting around here acting like a frickin' high schooler, saying things like, "If you want to know the truth, you have my number, just text me," meaning that you are telling someone to do something that you yourself are not doing. Sounds hypocritical to me. And then to someone who was pretty much saying, "Can we please just stop this because it's just so childish?" She's like, "No." It's just like, wow, you could not have picked a more childish response to that. It's just, actually, you know what? I think the only more childish response to that would have been like, "I will if you will," or "She started it." Other than that, this is the most childish response she could have picked. And it's just like, good God, Holly, you are just making yourself look so bad. It is not Alyssa that is making you look bad, despite what you're insisting. You are making you look bad with your own posts and your own actions. God, I cannot believe I used to love her. I borderline cannot stand her now. I mean, I still have some respect for Shannon, Alyssa, and even Rose, but there is just none left for Holly. Like, there is just nothing, in my opinion, that is respectable about her anymore. And moving into the House of Hollowell podcast, how can you call us your charmed family when you pull this exact same stuff on us? Of all 4 actresses, you easily come across as the most bitter, and you have been doing everything in your power to ruin Charmed for everyone, even before Shannon's podcast. You constantly complain about the show almost every time you talk about it. The House of Hollowell podcast is the perfect example of this. It's pretty much a non-stop diatribe of everything you didn't like. And speaking of the House of Hollowell podcast, this is how much your Charmed family apparently means to you. You guys made a Patreon and offered fans content in exchange for that patronage. When you didn't deliver, people started asking questions, and instead of communicating, you just went radio silent. People just wanted to know what was going on, and even when you guys finally decided to respond, the response was very short, very vague, didn't really say anything, and also, wouldn't you know, it was posted behind a paywall, so the only way you could see it is if you gave them money. Honestly, you guys would be so well deserved if the Patreon was shut down, especially since people have said, it's a rumor, I don't know the truth of it, but people did say that Holly went through deleting any and all comments after that, asking for communication from them about what was going on. So, take from that what you will, but as if that wasn't bad enough, this is what happens when they actually do bother releasing an episode.
It was the first time in the show where I saw a lot of you in like in the most beautiful way.
Yeah, you know why? Because of the person he was working with, and there was chemistry.
Yeah, so like there was all
I thought because he really had taken his shot.
You like this for real? You like this episode?
Until you know.
Till we pointed out the obvious.
Yes, and now I'm questioning whether I should or not.
No.
Whether you like the episode? Well, we also learned
am I allowed
Max
to?
saved her. There was a bigger thing here at play.
Oh, there was? I
Max,
missed it.
Max, like, Prue was unsure about having kids, and then at the end, she's like, you know what? I think I want kids because Max is special.
Well, she should go see Leo because he you know.
He's open to it.
I'll see you guys later.
iHeartRadio, and if you like watching this, you can check us out at patreon.com/HOH.
Do you see what I mean? When I say that Holly is doing her best to ruin this for everyone, I am not exaggerating. Like I said, the podcast is essentially a nonstop diatribe of her criticizing every little thing about the show, and she can't even let her castmates enjoy it either. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd feel sorry for Brian, but he was just so happy to talk about the episode where he finally got some real screen time, and all Holly can do is tear him down for it, because the majority of his scenes were with Alyssa, which admittedly was a little weird for me as a viewer. I was like, why is Phoebe out here macking on Leo? But it's not a huge deal, and definitely not something we all needed to hear about. I know that Holly clearly had an issue with Brian and Alyssa dating, but you have to remember that this podcast is supposed to be for the fans. They're literally donating their own money every month to help make this happen and support Drew, Holly, and Brian in their endeavor. And this is is what they get for it. Holly constantly tearing down the show, Brian being unable to share his actual feelings in case Holly gets pissed, and then Drew just being bewildered by it all. But he also pissed me off in that clip too. Like, seriously, shame on him for saying that Brian needs to get on the phone and apologize to Holly.
Patreon.com/HOH. I don't know if we're going to actually ever see Holly again.
I don't think so.
Bro, you need to get on the phone and apologize.
He's not the one who did anything wrong. If anything, Holly should be the one to apologize, and not only to Brian, but to her fans. Again, if Holly has issues with him regarding their time on set, then that shit needs to be handled off camera and not on the very podcast that is supposed to be for the fans that they are helping to fund. And see, this is where my biggest issue with this all comes in. The way it affects the fan base. Did fans want to know what really happened to make Shannon leave? Yes, of course. But you didn't just answer the question. You all made it into this frickin' soap opera that never ends. And by the way, let's be clear, you've all made it extremely clear what the main issue between all of you is, and it's the same damn issue that caused problems in the first place. It's the fact that you would all rather talk about each other rather than to each other. This one makes a statement, then that one makes a statement, and this one responds, so that one makes another statement, and on it goes, and it never ends because they're all out here talking about each other rather than to each other. Although it turns out that Alyssa actually is willing to talk it out with the other three, but they are being as stubborn as ever, and clearly they learned nothing from the mediator situation. It's like, how did refusing to come to the table work out for you before? But I digress. It'll be them who reaps the consequences, not me. So yeah, I guess Grams was pretty smart to just sidestep this whole thing. Like, nope, I'm not getting involved in that. It's just sad that they all know what it's like to be on the receiving end of the public's wrath, but still don't seem to have a problem throwing each other into the lion's den, so to speak. The only silver lining is it's no longer a problem. This is going to be my last video on the subject unless something big goes down and or someone starts showing proof of what they're saying, because otherwise it's just more hearsay, and I am so tired of hearsay, you have no idea. But anyway, that is the end of that. Next week we will finally be back to our usual content, including the long requested video on the Warrens, another Charmed Theories video, even more things that didn't make sense about the show, and a couple of surprises. I hope you guys are gonna like them. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a long ride with this drama, but thank you so much for sticking with me. And I hope you all have a wonderful day or night wherever you are. Before I say goodbye though, some of you might have noticed that the audio in this video is rather choppy. There is a reason for that. We have apparently been having every plane in existence fly over us. That's been fun. And then also, who remembers my sister's cat that likes to sabotage while I record? Yep, he was back in action. So please enjoy these bloopers of audio that had to be cut thanks to Kitty Sabotage. I love him so much. Bye guys! And we're going to start with that's my sister's cat in the water for the longest time until just like what? But either way, she Psst. What did you think was going to happen? And ever since then it's just like stuck with me. Hey! She then says that you